The calendar view. This is more of a sales center that gives us the information about aircraft availability. So all the empty tiles simply tell us where the aircraft is. And it also displays other things than just flights. We do not have positionings on here, but we do have reservations, and we also have maintenances, so that we see the aircraft is blocked and cannot be booked for flights. When we look at the flights, we have pretty much the same information as in the table. So we have the times, the airports, the crew. When you hover the mouse, same information. We also have the flight type. So in this case, that would be passengers. This is a ferry flight. We have the ops checklist. We have the sales checklist. The calendar view also displays a crew change, as you can see. In terms of the filter, we have pretty much the same information, except that in here we can also filter out maintenances and reservations. So if we select that and quick search, we can see that these have disappeared. We can have a layout either vertical or horizontal, and the flight types, commercial types, flight status and so on, that stays the same. We've got the aircraft and the searching mode, just like in the table view. Same goes for the warnings, cautions, notices. We can also dim the ferry flights here, so that the ferry flights, like this one for example, would be a lighter green. Yeah, right here. And we have the preferred airport code and the time zone. As for the right panel, same information here. So if you double click on the airport, it gives you the airport information. We have the checklist, the flight, trip, crew, and so on. We can also request the handling services from here, just like in the table view, and fill in the journey log and the flight watch, just like in the table view as well. The only difference between the table view and the calendar view is that the table view always displays the planned scheduled times of the flights. So regardless of whether the journey log is filled in or not, these times stay the same because that's our plan of the schedule. However, in the calendar times, they do change depending on the journey log, so that the sales department or any department who uses the calendar view will know that the flight has been changed, and they can see the actual times on here as well. So that's the only difference. And if you right click on a flight, you also have all the same information as you would have in the table view. The bottom panel looks exactly the same. We can add a new trip from here, or if we right click on an empty tile, we can add a trip or reservation, or simply add a note to the day on here as well. The calendar is very easy to use, simply drag and drop. With the aircraft on here, you can see that one is flashing red, exactly like it would in the table view if there's something that requires our attention, so that it flashes here so we know about this, just like with the crew warnings or the PAX warnings and any other warnings. When we add a reservation, a right panel shows again the reservation name from the list. Select the aircraft, the status, so if the reservation is confirmed or not, the date. Let's put it on here so we can see it clearly. We can assign a client if it's a client reserving the aircraft, some notes, and we can upload files as well. We can't see the reservations, so it's probably because they are turned off from the display. Okay, so now we can see the reservation clearly on here. If we want to edit the reservation, we simply click on it and edit information on the side, and if we want to delete it, we use the delete reservation button. Same goes for flights. If we want to remove a single flight, we can use the option delete flight on here, or if it's a full trip, we can delete the whole trip in here. But let's just leave them for now. Okay, before we go into the timeline, let's maybe go through the different colors and the different indications of the flight types. The green tiles, or the green flight number, let's use the table, that would be slightly easier. So a full green color like this, that means the flight is confirmed. So it is a regular commercial flight that's confirmed. If it's stripy like this, that means the flight is an option. So anything that's got stripes on it in all the different views, so in table, calendar and the timeline, and it's stripy, like for example, we have the stripes on the reservations here, we have the stripes on the maintenances here, that would be an option. So it's basically simply not confirmed. The flights that are blue are non-commercial. Non-commercial or simulators or training flights will also be blue. Non-commercial means they have the commercial checkbox unticked. So if I were to untick this one, the flight that we had marked, the trip that we had marked, will change to blue. The lighter ones, as I told you before, that's ferry flight. That's simply no passengers assigned. Grey ones are terminated, which means that journey logs have been filled in. In the calendar, we also have the reservations, which are purple, and the maintenances, which are brown. The maintenances can be also red if they're marked as AOG. To add a maintenance, simply go to Maintenance, Scheduled Maintenance, add New Scheduled Maintenance, put a name on it, tick if it's confirmed or not. So if it's ticked, that would be brown. If it's not ticked, that would be brown with stripes. If it's AOG, aircraft on ground, that would be red. And then you just fill in all the other information like the aircraft and the dates. And those will be displayed in the calendar and in the timeline. So these are the different colors. Let's now move to the timeline. The timeline is also very responsive to dragging, so you can just move it with your mouse like this, drag and drop. To narrow the view, we use these two zoom options, so we can zoom out. And if we simply want to go back to now, we select the option now. This green bar means this current point in time, always in UTC time. We will get to these bars in a second. So in the timeline view, the main difference is that we can see the flight watch times, unlike in the table or the calendar view. As for the filter, the options are pretty much the same. We can see the flight type, flight status, and we can also see flights that have been cancelled. In here we can select the aircraft that we want to see, just like in the other views. And in the display options here we have things like show on timeline, so we can select only aircraft that are active right now. In case an aircraft has a flight or an activity, or there's a reservation or a maintenance in the window that we have here kind of displayed, if we don't have that tick, that would display all the aircraft at all times, even if they don't have any activity going on. Crew warnings, we can have crew warnings as well, and rotation prognosis, which means this is this white belt on the bottom half of the flight here. Okay, we can apply. We also have the colors, just like in the timeline. We can have the aircraft colors ending ferry flight, and we also have markers, which are the two bars down here. The markers are set up in the general settings. Admins have access to set those up, and right now we have two that you can see. The crew ready is set up to 1 hour before the flight, and the flight plan ready is set up to be 3 hours before the flight. The crew ready one is the blue one, and the flight plan ready is the purple one. The way it works is once the marker reaches the start of the flight, you know there is a certain amount of time between you, so the green bar, and the marker. In this case it's 3 hours, in this case it's 1 hour. So when the purple bar reaches the start of this flight right here, we'll know we've got 3 hours till the flight and the flight plan has to be prepared. That's just an example. And we also have the preferred codes like in the other views. We can also add the flights from the timeline view in exactly the same way we would add them in the table or in the calendar. When we hover the mouse over the flight, we'll have the flight information, including the leg as well as the full trip details. The main difference between the views of the timeline and calendar and the table views are that in the timeline we have each flight represented by two belts. The one at the top is the planned flight, so it contains the times that we have initially scheduled for the flight. The one at the bottom is the realized flight. Okay, we can now quickly add a new trip that will be empty and we can work on it in the timeline. Okay, we have a simple trip here. Let's maybe turn off the markers. Okay, so we have a simple trip added as a plan here. We can see the red dot, that's the checklist, so it hasn't been prepared yet, so everything's red. You can see there's this red zigzaggy line at the front of the first flight, which means there's an airport discontinuity. So this flight happens to take off from Rome, but the aircraft was previously somewhere else and we didn't reposition the flight. So that's how it's marked in the timeline. It's light green because it's a ferry flight, and at the bottom we have the flight watch not filled in yet, so it's white, and it serves as a prognosis, which we call in the system rotation prognosis. The rotation set up by default for this aircraft is 15 minutes, which means it has to spend minimum of 15 minutes on the ground. But if we, let's say, change it to 1 hour, you can see the space between the prognosis is a little bit bigger to fit in the hour of time required on the ground. Maybe if we make it a little bit bigger, we can see it more clearly. Yeah, so there's hour and a half in between those two, which means this flight either has to be planned for a little bit later or the rotation has to be adjusted. So maybe let's go back to the 15 minutes and the rotation's back in place. The prognosis can be removed, it doesn't have to be here. In the display settings we have the show on timeline, and if we remove the rotation prognosis, we'll only have the planned bit. Because we haven't inserted any actual times yet, the bottom part is empty. But let's have the prognosis, just so we can see how it changes. Okay, so at the moment it's white, but let's take the first leg. Takes us to the flight watch. So as I said, it can be filled in manually or it can be filled in by Eurocontrol. The bottom belt changes along with the flight watch times. Okay, so if we enter the takeoff time, for example, the plan was at 16 and we enter the takeoff at 16, let's say 15, and save. We can see the bottom belt has moved by the 15 minutes and it turned blue. That means the aircraft has taken off and it's airborne now. And then once the landing is inserted into the flight watch, let's maybe move it to a little bit later. The bottom belt changed to this yellowish color. The landing time has moved to 8 p.m. and we can see the prognosis for the next flight has moved along with the rotation time, so that's 15 minutes in between then. So what we can do now, we can reschedule this flight, or we can simply enter the flight times for the next leg. Okay, so we have the realized legs at the bottom here versus the plans at the top. Now if we go and fill in the journey log, we can either copy the data from flight watch, what we had the takeoff and landing, and fill in the blanks. Remember, if the times of the actual flight move to after midnight, for example, if we were planned to fly before midnight but we actually taken off after midnight, or the block off was after midnight, we also have to change the date here. So please bear that in mind. The block fuel yes, I know. Okay, future flight. Okay, so now we have this leg filled in. The journey log for this leg has been filled in. So it turned grey. That means it's a terminated flight. We should probably do it the other way around, but okay, so these flights are done. We can see how they were planned, and at the bottom how they got actually realized in time. So there we go, the main difference between the different views. But the flights that we were adding were based on an ad hoc operation. So we were adding 1 or 2 flights at a time. However, if we were to have scheduled times, so we actually have a season with regular flights to certain destinations, and we were to add those to our view, we can either obviously do it one by one, or we can use the commercial orders. This is a place where we can simply create a schedule for multiple flights for different seasons. So before we go to commercial orders, we need to specify a season. For example, let's put summer 2019. Select the date. And update. We can add as many seasons as we need to. Now we can go to commercial orders, select a season. Okay, and now we can add our first schedule. So we click add new commercial order and new schedule. We can also add a client in here if we want to. The client, as you remember, has to be added through the phone book. Okay, so we have the dates that we selected for the season. We select the aircraft, maybe a big one. The ICAO type scheduled, so we leave it as S. Trip type PAX. By default, commercial, okay. Rotation weekly, bi-weekly or every 3 weeks. AOC, if we have different, then we can set different, but for now we'll just leave it to default. We select the days on which the flights will take place. So maybe let's do Mondays and Thursdays. And now we can specify the route. Okay, and now we can click update. That's the basic schedule we can add through commercial order. If we were to make any changes before we actually prepare any of those flights, we can go through the edit option and adjust the settings here. However, if we now go to the schedule, we can see all the flights were added on here, and now we can start preparing them. The crucial thing to remember here is that if we make any changes, for example, to the times of the flight, this flight is now excluded from the main schedule in the commercial orders. So to explain what I mean, I will go to the commercial order. That's the one we have added, and now I will edit something on here. For example, I will edit the departure time to 10:20. So, and I go back to the schedule. We can see now that all the flights have changed their times of departure to 10:20, apart from the one that I've made changes to via this page before. So any changes that you make to certain flights on here will disconnect this particular flight from the main schedule that we added through the commercial orders. So that's one thing to remember. And now we can start preparing each flight as we would any other. We can add the crews via the crew tab, or in case of regular flights with the same crew flying them, we can go to the menu crew input table, and add the crews a little bit faster through here. So we select the month, for example June, aircraft, we can have all, that's fine, and click show. So now we have the list of the flights we added through commercial orders, and now we can start adding the crew. Again, the list, just like the schedule, is showing the crews at the correct airport or outside of this airport, but we'll just work with that for now. So just click, the list shows up, and then we can add the crews for this one leg only. For example, let's have these 3 for now. Instead of adding the same crews to each leg, just like I did right now, we can just click copy and save. This way we can copy the crews to all the other legs. Now if we go back to schedule, we can see the crews are assigned for a whole of June because we've selected June in the filter. Okay, and now we can start preparing the flights, do the checklists, adjust the details, and so on and so forth. Okay, so these are the main bits that you'll be using in the schedule in regards to adding and editing different aircraft activities. Please subscribe to our channel if you wish to see more of these videos. And if you have any questions, feel free to use our online manual or contact our support team.